right, it is Lopez Radio episode 382. We've been doing this a while, guys, and I'm glad you're here today because it's a very special episode because someone I've met, I think we met in 2018 at Atlanta DreamHack, has decided to join us today. And very excited because he just released an amazing game called The Mortuary Assistant, which I've been playing on Twitch quite a bit lately. I've been batting between that and Cult of the Lamb, a pretty good bit. And it's so fun to see this guy grow and just pump out these games that are just a lot of fun. It's Brian Clarke from Darkstone Digital. You can follow him on we can follow him on Twitter. DS Digital Dev at DS Digital Dev, and I'll have links up to all of his other stuff in the description for the podcast and the YouTube video. Brian, welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, awesome. This is cool, man. I feel like this has been a long time coming. Ever since we met, and I've been playing your games. I'm just like, I need to reach out to that guy because I know you're a podcast guy, and you know because you would listen to podcasts while you were deving on Twitch and stuff like that.
Yep.
So I was like, man, I would have a great conversation with this guy. So I'm glad
finally it's been a while. So it's good to finally be talking and stuff.
Yeah, it's been awesome. So I always start this. Well, I say always. I usually forget, but I'm going to do it now. I always start and I ask the guest, "What's on your mind? What's going on right now? Like, what is top? Like right now, if we were to not be doing this, what's the thing you're addressing at the moment?"
Actually some stuff that I am not able to talk about yet, which I am very excited for, and I really hope I can talk about it soon. But other than that, just PAX coming up. I'm going to be getting all my stuff together before that and then flying out to Seattle. So,
PAX West.
Other than that and drinking some rye, that's what awesome. I've got going on.
Cheers, by the way. Cheers, man. That's it's been a hard fought 2 years for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
I've just been very excited to see this kind of all happen. And what I wanted to ask you, so we talked in my other show offline, and you had brought up the original demo or prototype that was 3 years ago at this point, 3+ years ago. Played that. I've played it, and then the demo came out, and for what is now the Mortuary Assistant. Do you feel like the timing? I don't know if this was all thought out, but the timing of the demo was man, that's great timing because it got people pumped enough to be like, yes, this game's happening, and then it was probably a year and change before the game came out. Yeah.
So I wouldn't say there is a specific plan of I'm going to do this and then in this much time release the game, right? Because I mean, you mentioned the prototype, it's that was created a while before, I think I even started Our Secret Below, and then during that, the Kickstarter for that is when I put the prototype up, and it gained some traction. And I was like, oh crap, people want to play this game, so I want to make that, but I still need to finish this one. So that's kind of how that moment started. But from there, I just started working on the full game after Our Secret Below. So that's why there was such a large amount of lag between the prototype and the demo. Mm-hmm. And there was just so much I needed to do because we talked before, solo developer, I'm making all the art, I'm doing the programming and all that sort of stuff. And the haunt system is pretty elaborate. So that's where a lot of development time went. And there was a lot of systems that got made and then canned. So really, I was just trying to build the core, I'm embalming and spooky stuff can happen. Mm-hmm. And then finally I got to a point where it's I need to pretty this up a bit and try to put something out for people to play. And that sort of lit a fire under me to do some polishy stuff for the UI and just various art things and make actual events that are story events and stuff. And that finally was the tipping point of now I'm ready to just build all the content and make the full game, right? And that from putting the demo out, that was just I just need to go as quickly as I can to get this done while still making it good, and not just pooping it out to try and meet a deadline. But because I mean, you play the demo, even still, it says that it comes out in like spring when it ended up coming out close. It came out in the beginning of summer. It wasn't too far off, but
Right.
yeah, it did get pushed a little bit just because, you know, I wasn't going to put something out that wasn't ready.
Yeah,
But,
I'd say you're doing pretty good on your timeline compared to how games usually are. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who misunderstand the timeline for a game where it's like,
sure, yeah.
No, that's when they want it to be out. It's not necessarily when it's going to be out, and everybody's just like, I can't believe they delayed blah blah blah. You know.
Well, even in AAA, it's
Mhm.
like there's this thing where just like you've got to have a date to tell people, right?
Mhm.
Because you've got to give people a timeline for interest, you know? Because it's like if you say Dark Souls 6 coming out sometime, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not good. That's not going to build hype. People will be like, "Oh, well, that's cool. Okay, well, I guess I'll wait and see if anybody says anything."
Yeah.
But if they say it's coming out in a year, then that's way more hype, right? And that's been the case at every game that I've worked on. There needs to be a release date, and it's never met. And
Right.
it's not because, you know, it's not because game developers are liars. It's just you try to estimate a window best you can for when it's going to potentially launch, and you try to hit that. And then if you don't, you either are going to be a company that puts out a broken game, or you're going to be a company that bites the bullet and takes extra time to make it. Now, are you going to take the appropriate amount of extra time to make it? I don't know. That depends. But yeah, it's the launch date is never something that I think is concrete right up until like even a month before launch, because you just have no idea when something can break and go wrong before you hit like gold master and like are ready to go, you know. But
Yeah. I mean, it's like because like you said, anything could happen. You could have something pop up where like, oh, all of a sudden I've got to do something. I mean, it kind of did, right? You had some things pop up where you did work for Dread XP,
Yep.
and you know that
not my
factors
fault,
in.
but
Hey, but I mean, I think it helped,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, with Dread, like I wasn't looking for a publisher at all at the time. I really didn't want to. I had some things where like I had kind of going off topic, I guess, but I had applied the game to Devolver Digital like a while ago, and I didn't have tons of like polished looking stuff, and they turned me down.
Right.
And then the demo came out, and suddenly there was a lot of interest. And I had been talking to a number of different publishers, and I was very uncertain because I just didn't. I don't know. The idea of a publisher didn't quite sit well with me. I heard a lot of horror stories, but then Dread XP reached out to me, and they were like, "Do you want to do a mini game for our collection?" And I hadn't even really heard of them. I had seen some Dread stuff before, and I think I had remembered seeing one of the collections at some point, like being mentioned, but that was the most exposure I had had. So obviously I went and did a bunch of research on them and everything, figured out what it was. And I really liked where they were at, because they started for helping indie devs make money during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So they're very, very new. But their values aligned with mine. So I was like, yeah, okay, I can do that. And I was like, I wasn't with a publisher or anything. So I was like, I'll just, if it takes a little bit of extra time to finish Mortuary Assistant, it takes a little bit of extra time. I don't think it will, but who knows? Because this is a small project. So I agreed to do it, and I did Book of Blood. And that came out all right. There's stuff that I think it's lacking, but I mean, it was made in a very short amount of time, so I can't be too hard on myself, I don't think. But,
Right.
But still, obviously, yes, that pushed things in a weird way. And then I agreed to have them as my publisher, and then they wanted a version of the game for something else. And it ended up not mattering, but I was like, okay, well, now I have to push this out. So now I'm trying to get this thing as polished as possible for this release thing, this like thing they wanted, and try to get Book of Blood done. So that ended up causing a lot of weird tripping up. And then once all that was done, I could be like, now I need to focus on like getting something together for PAX, because that was the last PAX where it was like, I want to have something new to show. I can't just bring the demo again. It's been out for a bit. So
Sure.
I made a PAX specific build, And that took extra time because I made a special end sequence for that and like special things just for packs. So that took time to author, which is probably what pushed that stuff back a little bit. But yeah, those things happen. And, from a AAA scale down to a solo indie scale, there are things that just make sense to do because they're advantageous for the potential of your launch, or they just need to be done in order for the game to be good. Like, you never know. So yeah. Anything can happen that throws that date off.
And I can see how like having a, courting publishers and trying to figure out what do I want to do with this thing is like, it's stressful. Like the only thing I could probably relate it to, it seems like deciding whether or not to take your baby to like this daycare or that daycare. Like it's like, you're going to be taking care of this thing. And I hope it's as important to you as it is to me. And that's got to be hyper stressful. What I do like is the fact that because you did a Patreon for Mortuary Assistant, and I was part of that, and you had a good contingency of people that were really rooting for you, and you were pretty good about just like communicating, saying, hey, this is what's going on. This is what I've got this thing. Maybe I can't talk about it. Maybe I can. But I never felt like you did the, hey, thanks for kickstarting me. You're not going to hear from me for like a year and a half.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because like I feel bad when I don't put stuff up on Patreon in a timely manner. And I know there are moments like this where it falls off because, I'm doing a million things and I'm traveling and stuff. And it's like, I'll be giving like updates for packs to it just because I want to throw something up there. But even with that, like people tell me it's like, hey, I've been, I'm subbed to some Patreons that like they never put anything up. It's just I just do it to support, and it's like kind of realize that Patreon, while you should obviously trying to be creating things for those people that are special for them as often as you can, it also isn't the end of the world if you can't, because those people are there to support you, like ultimately, and that's a very weird thing for me. to suddenly be like, oh, these people want to support what I'm doing, and I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. Feels weird, but all right. I still need to get something out though, and it's tough to not want to do that.
Right. Yeah. And the thing about Patreon that's even weird for me, I did Patreon for a little while, and I was doing like special episodes just for them and stuff like that, and it's hard to keep up with, but like it's also hard for like the creator, like you said, to be like, oh, these people are already like fans, like, so for most of them it's not the end of the world if I can't make, like, okay, I didn't make something this week, and they're a little more understanding because they're already there. It's kind of like the comedian.
I wouldn't be surprised if half my Patreons or more don't check Patreon. Like it's like they're
I never do.
Right. That's the thing, right? To me, it's like subbing on Twitch or something. It's like it's sort of like, this is my sub to you for the stuff you're doing. And if I get something extra that I like, awesome.
Yeah.
But I think that's the mindset of most patrons. And that's awesome. That doesn't change the fact that I want to still put stuff up, and it's not just sitting in the back of my mind all the time. But
you can't abandon it completely, I think, but it's one of those,
of
like,
course not.
It's that job you had where you had a little bit of leeway to show up 15 minutes late, like back in the day, like all right, I'm not going to say anything, you're fine, you show up and you work hard, kind of thing. So it's not too bad. It's interesting, like, so you're about to go to PAX West. The last thing I did before the world ended with COVID, right? Like the last thing I did was PAX East. And that was like the last big event that happened before everything shut down. I don't know if you remember, but like Sony pulled out of that. Like, it was a big deal.
It went super down.
Yeah. And so I'm a big fan of the PAX stuff, and all I can think about when you're talking about going to PAX West is like when I met you at DreamHack 2018, you had a table and a small subject banner and a laptop. And I
brought my TV.
Oh yeah, you did have the TV. Yeah, you did have the TV. But like, I was wondering, like, do you like? So what's the booth setup this time? Is it similar, or is it going to be a little more substantial?
I mean, I guess it doesn't matter talking about it. It's only in a day or two, and I don't think they'd care anyway. So the booth is going to be pretty Mortuary Assistant centric. It's a decent sized booth. I believe it's near the entrance. And yeah, like last last PAX, I was pretty small because I was kind of shoehorned in. Like they had already set everything up and they had just acquired me and they wanted me to be there. So there was like a computer with the game on it. And like I had a panel with the mortuary assistant old lady on it, like on a side that was not a busy traffic area, you know? But I was still at PAX, which is something I had never been to. Right.
Sure.
And now it's going to be, it's definitely going to be more of the focus of the booth this time from the sounds of it. And that's, and hopefully some of the things that I can't talk about now will be talked about, but I'm not sure.
No.
We'll see. But it's pretty wild. Yeah. I mean, it's the publisher doing it, it's not like I'm out of pocket, going to PAX, but it's like that journey from, I got a free slot. So I got a little like, whatever it is, 8x8 booth or whatever that thing is. And then go from there to this is pretty surreal because in my mind, in my experience, that's other developers that I hear about, right? I hear about other developers that manage to, they hit just right or have a game people really like, and they do these fancy things and everything. And it's like, that's not something that I like. I was like, I really hope I can do that someday.
Right.
And it's, it's weird to have it happening. It feels like, we were talking about imposter syndrome before the other show where it was like, I still have that feeling of like, everything's just gonna be gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
And people are just being nice.
Right. Well, I think
they're just saying they like it,
Yeah. I think that's like a low key motivator too, to be like, okay, well, I got this thing and I want to hold on to that. You want to keep that trajectory and that momentum going. Right. So I think it's good because I think that some people lose that over time. They're kind of like, we've all seen, like, met people that are like used to being told yes on everything. Right.
Yeah.
And, so I think that's a good thing. I don't think imposter syndrome is necessarily a bad thing as long as it doesn't hinder you.
I agree. I think it is a healthy, at least for me, it's part of the mix that makes me being able to work consistently possible. Right. Like, and I think it's part of what keeps me updating the game as much as I do and being as involved as I am. Is like, I want to make sure that what I'm experiencing is true.
Right.
And if it is, I want to keep supporting that. I want to do everything I can to make that the best it can be and make players have the best experience they can. And like, it all kind of goes hand in hand. So yeah, I agree. I believe it's part of the motivation as long as it isn't something that overtakes you.
I think that too is like just indicative of someone who's a creative anyway. Like, you have a few things. You have imposter syndrome. Usually you don't. You just hate everything you put out, even though everyone else seems to like it. You're like this sucks, but here, take a look at it. And they're like, this is great. You're like, no, it's not, but thank you. Like, it's that whole like completely self-motivating cycle of just like, I can do better. I can do better. I can do better. And I think you have to have that in order to be at a certain level of, just creation, just to have to move forward. Because otherwise, if you're not, like you were talking about an offline, like if you don't have the ability to tell yourself to keep going or to set some lines for yourself and set some small goals, like you're just not going to make it. Like you'll get burnt out quick.
Yeah, absolutely. And I try to keep that, oh no, what are you talking about? It sucks to myself
right.
more now. Right. Cause it's like, obviously, I don't want to go saying that to everybody. If they think it's good, I don't want them going like, well, why does he think it's bad? Right. It's like, no, I don't think it's bad. I don't think Mortuary Assistant is bad. I'm extremely proud of it. But there are things where I'm like, I need to make that better. I need to go back and fix that. I need to add to this. I would love to put more story for that. Right. Yeah. And there's just, I think that's just, like you said, creatives in general. They're always, they're worst critics of their work.
Yeah. You have the one tile on the floor that you didn't polish just right.
Yeah.
Like you're like, exactly. I see it every time I walk by it,
I kind of changed my view of that actually back in high school. I was in wood shop and I had made something and I was telling my teacher about it and talking about the issues that I had and stuff. And he's like, look, if you're trying to sell a table to someone, you don't point out the nicks and scratches that you let them decide if it's good. And because he was like, I came to this and thought it was fantastic. I don't see the things that you see because you're the one that made it. You're going to see everything, right? So that little lesson, this one weird thing in high school, was like a big thing for me to help me realize like how to approach something that you make that you're putting out for the world, which is just don't point out the flaws to others, not to be secretive, not to keep things from people and hope they don't see it, but to just let them really give you feedback on what it is, how it really is. It's like, oh, well, this feels quality to me. It's like, oh, good. Okay. Well, then I won't mention any of the others. You know,
he didn't see the tile. Good.
Yeah,
you know, it's
yeah, exactly. So it's, I think that's an important thing to try and to keep with you to some degree, is like realize that you're the one that made it. You're always going to see every single flaw with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's fairly normal. I mean, I think people have that. I think people have that kind of mentality about themselves when they look at themselves in the mirror, even just getting ready for the day. Like, oh God, look at that bump on my cheek, you know, and no one even knows.
This guy again.
Yeah. Well, what are you? I've seen you for, going on 4 decades and I hate you every time. But then you go out and you're like, I love myself. And like, it's funny because when me and my wife started dating, I have a very, amongst me and my friends, we have very self-deprecating humor, like as most, I think, our generation kind of does, right? It's the best kind. But like she came from like a background of like, athletes, people who did track and field, and, you very rarely had too many people, I think. I'm just assuming that I think were really like shit talking themselves, even though they pushed themselves in different ways. Like, I suck doing that or whatever. But like, she would always be like, why are you shit talking yourself? Don't do that. I'm like, I don't really think I don't really want to go jump off that building. I just want, I'm just like, I don't want to go to work today. Like, that's all it is. But, it's just kind of, it's interesting when you run into people that don't have that kind of a humor,
Yeah. Well, I forget where I heard it. I forget if I was talking to someone or if I had heard it somewhere, but the concept of like, when you're saying negative things about yourself, you ask yourself if that's something that you would say to your kid or to your friend or to your wife or girlfriend or whatever, right? It's like, is that something you would say to them? If not, then why would you say that to yourself?
Right.
Kind of thing. Now I totally get there's a little bit of rosiness in that, like you're saying, people will say that about themselves and not mean it. Sure. It's like, it's just more of a humorous kind of thing. So it's a gray area.
Right.
It's good to keep yourself in check.
Right. Like, I do like IT work. So like you get the client where you're like, oh, this fucking guy. Like, so one of those things was like, I'm going to go help him, but I'm going to bitch about it every step until I get there. Hey, how's it going? Good to see you. It's funny you bring up the kid thing because, I know you've got a family, and my kid's about to turn 16 or just turned 16 months old. And it's like, there are some times where I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't say that in front of my kid about myself. But then there's sometimes where I know when she's older, I'm going to lean down and be like, honey, daddy's a dumbass. So please, please just understand that your dad is a moron, stuff like that. But, hopefully I'm hoping I can transfer some of that humor down a little bit.
Yeah. It'll happen. What's weird is the amount of stuff that's like just seems to be hereditary, like things that just happen. You didn't even do anything, and suddenly they're like, they behave a certain way, and you're like, oh man, that whole like that's my kid thing is totally a thing. It's really weird.
Yeah.
But,
like, I know that furrowed brow. Oof.
Yeah, they'll say something or they'll behave a certain way or perceive something a certain way. And it's like exactly what you would do. And you have no idea if it's, do I do something that made them perceive it that way and I didn't realize it? Or do they just do that? Like, did I mess up, or is that just natural? Is that in the DNA?
Yeah.
There's don't know.
There's a couple of things like, there's a couple of things where like she'll get frustrated because she's learned, she's walking pretty well now, and she's, figuring things out. But then you see that like when something doesn't go quite right, that frustration, and you're like, oh, this is her curse too. Like she will be cursed like me. And there's nothing you did to teach that. And it's pretty amazing though. Still just to see it happen. Yeah. It's like, well, someone's here with me now. We're in this together going forward.
Like my daughter got in her head that she wants to live in a van and like travel in a van. Okay. And I think we went camping recently, and I think she saw a few of them and she thought that was really compelling. So she was like, I want to do that. But she started just in her head designing all this stuff that she was going to do to this van and how it was going to be laid out. And then she got like a little notebook and put in the notebook like her van idea and everything. And my wife was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I would do. And it's like, we didn't teach her that. She's just like, that's just a thing that she does that is also something my wife does. So it's interesting to see. Kids are weird, man.
Yeah, I'm interested to know like what you don't know. I mean, obviously you've been a parent for a little while now compared to me, but like you just like people who don't have a kid yet or don't plan on having kids, they just don't know like when you're looking at your kid, like what will impress upon you. Like I want you to love Ghostbusters, but I don't want to push Ghostbusters on.
Force you to,
right, exactly. Right. Like Beetlejuice is amazing, but I don't want you to perceive that I'm forcing this on you. So I'm just going to casually play it in the background, and maybe you'll be like, "What is this?"
Yeah. my son's there, and I'm like, "You want to watch Star Wars? You want to watch it again?"
Right.
slowly feeding it.
I can be here all day, buddy. Come on.
Yeah. We'll see who blinks first.
Yeah, because I think there's you tread that weird line, especially depending on the age, right? Like they will get to a point where they're kind of like, whatever you're doing, stupid, because it's you doing it, right?
Yeah. I don't know when it'll be. I don't know what it'll be, but there'll be something I do where my kid's like, oh, jeez.
Right. Yeah. Like,
it'll happen.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see.
That's
see
funny,
what it
man.
is.
It's so funny, but like what I'm loving so far is, and this you'd probably get a kick out of this, is like she likes to be startled. Like it doesn't make her cry. She just immediately starts laughing and she's like, more. Like I'm just like and I'm not like jumping at me like, ah, but I'll just be like, just take her by surprise on something. She'd be like, yeah, more again. Like, and then today she really had like her first like conscious. There's a thunderstorm going on outside, and it didn't scare her at all. She was like, every time it thundered, she's like, thunder, more. I was like, well, just give it a second. It'll do it again. Like, so she's not like petrified. So I'm like, there's hope. She could be a horror fan. It'll be, she'll be playing scary games, and I can share like all this stuff with her because I love horror so much. Yeah. And you mentioned in offline that you were a lot of your scares and a lot of your, influence for stuff like that came from movies.
Yeah.
I did have there was a question, and I kind of did a little title segment for the questions that came from everybody. So let me do the sound drop. Questions from the living. Questions from the living. Someone asked. Let me see. Chris 99783 on Twitter wants to know, what was the inspiration for the Mimic? Like what? How did he show up? What motivated that?
So for a long while, I watch. I don't know if you're familiar with Slapped Ham. It's a YouTube channel where it's a lot of like closed circuit television of like ghosts caught on camera and stuff like that. So I watched a lot of that stuff, especially while I was working on parts of Mortuary Assistant. And the goal for all the spirits was I wanted familiarity. I wanted something that people had kind of seen before, or maybe seen a variant of or heard about. And there was this thing that would come up over and over again in all these videos of just the pale, out of focus creature with the sunken eyes and everything. And it's just like, out of the corner of the camera over someone's shoulder. And when they focus on it, it goes away. And like, that's just, you see so much of that. And there's this very creepy feeling to that. Like all those videos are super grainy and look like they were taken in like 1992, even though it was like a year ago. And it's just to keep everything, super questiony, because the unknown is the most scary thing. Right. I was like, well, what could I make that is similar to that? And there was oddly enough, just out of nowhere, I watch Some Ordinary Gamers sometimes, who does like dark web videos and stuff. And there's a thumbnail for one of his videos that has this creepy all white face with these big piercing eye things, and it's got like a split in the middle of the face and everything. But I was like, those eyes and that kind of concept are really creepy. And so I took those two things that really sort of struck me, and I was like, you know what, I want to do this thing where every time you see something, when you discover something, it's reactionary scares. So this would be perfect to do something where this creepy thing is looking at you, and the moment you see it, it's like, oh shit, it goes away, right? So it's the same sort of concept, and that's how the Mimic came about. But then I have lore behind each of these that I created, and what sort of, before I did the actual model, before I made the art for him, I made some lore about the concept of this spirit is basically that it's a manifestation of a demon type impish creature in hell that basically is doomed to live this existence where it can't be perfectly human. It longs to be human. It suffers from envy, which is why it's from the house of invidiousness. Mm-hmm. And so it has basically made this mannequin-esque suit. So that's not what it really looks like. Nobody knows what it looks like underneath, but it's got this weird, like, trying to be a human, super stiff, kind of creepy suit. And so that's what gave the idea of this, kind of dry, cracked skin. It's very stiff in its motions, and like its face is very, like, the eyes are wide, it can't blink, it's constantly smiling. It's just like a really, like, failed, crappy version of a person. And that's why it's like its ears aren't formed, its nose isn't formed. And that's where the idea came from. It's sort of a combination of a few different inspirations, and then the lore that I put behind it to sort of drive it.
Kind of has the roach guy from Men in Black. Remember when he was just wearing the skin suit?
He's
like
the skin suit, the Edgar suit. Yeah,
trying to be just like normal, but just not quite pulling it off.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got to be kind of surreal too, because I think I saw where you retweeted something. Someone's already done like cosplay for this thing, and
that is by far the craziest thing to see people doing, like even minimal cosplay stuff. I've been seeing fan art, which I shared some earlier today, actually. Yeah. That's fantastic. And that's like, it's really crazy to see something that I've made, like, have characters that people attach to, and like they're interesting enough to them that they want to cosplay or they want to draw or whatever. And there was someone who, when the demo came out, made a little mini comic about it. And like, it's crazy to see these things just off of something that, I've never been on this side of things, where it's like I've created something that people I don't even know, like, really enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, it's just extremely surreal, because it's weird to have something that's become somewhat successful, and like trying to figure out, well, where do I go from here? What do I do with this? And every time I see those things, like, it's just a little bit more of like that little bit of what we were talking about earlier. It's like, really, you want to? Okay, cool. That's great.
That's great. Yeah, sure. Go for it. Yeah.
I love to see it, and I share it every time I see something. And like, sometimes people will make things and not tag me, and like, I won't see it, but then eventually it'll show up in Discord, and I'll find it, and then I'll share it a whole bunch, because I'm like, oh my God, look, this person did something, because it's super cool to me, right? It's rare. Not everybody gets to make something that other people get inspired by to some degree, and it's very odd, but also very cool.
I feel like that would be like the coolest thing about doing something like what you're doing. It's like all of a sudden, there's the possibility, like, I'm not saying it's going to happen, there's the possibility that someone could walk up to you at PAX cosplaying as your dude. Like
That'd be wild.
I mean, or you just look over and he's just like standing on a table looking at you or something like that.
Oh my God, I'd take so many pictures with that person.
Yeah.
Just like I'd go all over PAX with them if they were the mimic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
all right, you stand here.
Various places. Yeah. You stand there. I'm going to be over here. Now you stand over there.
Right.
Dude,
You're a lion. You're a lion. Do it. Do the you start really directing everything. But
yeah,
that would be the coolest, I think.
Yeah, I can't imagine somebody would, but I mean, you never know. It'd be crazy. That would be a whole new level of like, just, I'm blown away every time somebody does anything that's inspired by the game. Someone's working on a wiki for the game. Just that is like someone else out there in the world likes the game enough that they are taking the time to make a data source for people about the game. And to me, that's phenomenal. That's amazing. That's extremely surreal. And like, I can't express how appreciative I am of it and how much it actually means to me to see these things, because it's so out there for me.
Yeah. Well, and there's a contingency of people, like, just from playing games, like in general, and being a part of like this community or that community, that are just, they're hungry for lore. Like, they just want lore. I want to know more about Raymond. I want to know more about the Mimic. I want to know more about what's going on with all these characters that are a main part of the story, but also on the outside as well. Like, and
thank God I wrote lore for them.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think that it's just kind of, it's insane now. Like, some games I'll play and I'm like, okay, there's lore, great. But then some games I'll play and I'll read every line of lore. It just depends on how it strikes you. But sure. That's such a cool concept of, like you said, someone is taking your thing and just being like, this is great. I want to do my own version or rendition of that. And what I wonder is, because I listened to your appearance on Pores and Pixels just a couple weeks ago, a few weeks ago or whatever. Amazing job. Those guys I think they're just starting out on doing that.
I feel so bad. They wanted me to come on again. I think it was yesterday, and I was too busy. I had other stuff going on. I knew I was working on the patch and trying to get stuff out. Maybe it was the day before yesterday, but yeah, they're fantastic, and I'd love to be on there again. But
really cool concept. I would highly suggest, if you enjoy this show, you would like that show. I mean, they drink and they talk about video games. Like, what else do you want? It's cool. Like, I was kind of wondering, I didn't know at the time, because doing my research, I was like, well, I'm gonna listen to this interview to make sure, there's something I can't elaborate on, but I didn't know you were honestly, such an art dude, like leading up to all that. You talked about how you were, art director for a couple of studios and stuff like that. And before we get into that, like in talking about like all these characters you've got in the Mortuary system, do you kind of like get an idea for a character? Maybe it's not quite in a game yet, and you're just kind of like, I'm going to throw that in a portfolio, just like an idea that I've got about some dude that could show up in another game.
Now it's less granular than that, where it's more like sort of a high concept that, like, I'm working on something and something will just kind of ping in the back of my head and I'm like, oh, that's a neat idea. And usually, I'll just make a little note in my phone, or I'll write it down in one of my notebooks here. That's just like, it's like a 2-word thing or something, because like, I try really hard to not get distracted by new things when I'm trying to get something done. Right. Because I think it's really easy. I see it all the time to like, you sort of stall on the thing you're working on, and then you get a new idea that is obviously going to be more fun, because the beginning of development is always super fun, because you get to just make whatever you want. There's no time frame, there's no deadline, there's nothing. You're just coming up with fun stuff, and then you're making a gray box proxy version of things and just trying stuff out. And so it's really easy to become enamored with that and not go back to the project that you've been working on. So when I have those ideas, I try to like recognize that it resonates with me and then record it somewhere. Or maybe, sometimes I'll do something where I might write a paragraph or something if it's a larger game idea or something like that. But I try not to get too distracted. But still, overall, I'll work on some things and I'll come up with an idea, and maybe it'll spawn something else or inspire something else. And I'll make sure I jot it down, because I don't want to forget it. Sometimes I do a terrible job of jotting it down, and I'll look at a note and go, what the hell is this? And then I'm just like, well, it must not have been that good. I
Yeah.
can't remember.
Yeah, I mean it's hard too because it's almost like sometimes when you're creating stuff or when you're you have a show you're doing or something like that, like you get an idea and like you almost have to write it at least blurb about it, just because it's like a dream sometimes. Like I'll literally be cutting the grass. I'll be cutting the grass and I'll be like, oh man, that'd be really, really cool. And if I don't stop and make a note in my phone, I'll get in later and I'll like be cleaning up or whatever. I'll be like, what was that thing? That's a thing I was really excited about out there, and I don't remember it, and it feels terrible. So that's my big like pointer to anyone who wants to do anything creative. Is like if you get an idea, just at least write a word or two.
Yeah, you
anything,
jot it down. Because there are definitely things where I've had the exact same thing happen. Because creativity strikes at the worst times.
Terribly. Yeah,
you're just like pretty much you unless you've trained yourself very much, you can't really just sit down and be like, time to be creative, right? Like what's been really unfortunate for me during the tail end of development is my creativity for problem solving was happening around 3 a.m. So I'd be asleep and then I'd not be able to sleep really well. And I'd kind of toss and turn and wake up a little bit. And then I'd get an idea and I go, oh, well, that might be a solution to something. And so then I would start thinking about it. I'm like, all right, well, I'm not going to sleep. So I would get up and I'd pace in the dark in the living room until I like finally figured everything out, and I'd be writing stuff down. And then once I kind of had it all figured out, I have like stuff for like Book of Blood, where if it's a time crunch specifically, I tend to do that a lot because my brain will be like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then there's just entire, like this whole thing pretty much is just jottings from 3 a.m. about Book of Blood. So it's just when that stuff happens, you can't really control it too much. You can supposedly train it, but I suck at doing that. So
yeah. And you brought up a great point of like being able to not allow that to pull you away from what you're working on, because I think that's so easy to do. It's so easy to just be like, all right, I'm working on this one thing specifically, and something you talked about in offline of just like take the one thing you can take a bite of and just work on that thing, even though you might have this grand vision, like work on that. And at the same time, like you said, you get into the thick of it and you're kind of like, but man, it would be cool if I had this guy with wings that was just kind of flying around the room. It's like, no, go back to what you were doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's different permutations of it, right? Because there's like stuff for other projects where you take your note and you leave it. And then there's other things that could form into feature creep on your current game if you're not careful, Yeah. So there's a lot of keeping yourself in check, like to make sure you don't work on another project, to make sure you don't get distracted by some other thing, to make sure you don't decide to add some new thing that puts a ton of work in and adds new like content or work that isn't necessarily great for the game. Like there's all kinds of stuff that you can get distracted by.
Do you have anything in, I mean, it could be any of your games, I guess, but if you're going through it and you look at it, you're like, oh yeah, I was watching a lot of this movie at this time. I can see where my influence was from this came in because I
get more of that with, like I'll watch, sometimes I'll hit things and then I'll watch like a movie once or twice, just to like be a refresher on things. Mm-hmm. But usually like the thing that comes back to me when I look at old work mainly is music. It's like whatever I was listening to at the time. Mm-hmm. Like I can think of right now, like it came back to me as like Marches of Madness in Warhammer is all Disturbed. Oh, back in the early aughts where they were still popular, it's like I'd be up until like 2 a.m, working in my little cubicle on that zone and just on repeat playing Disturbed, just not even listening to it. I mean, it's all the same song anyway. Sure. So you put on the CD and you got an hour of the same thing going. So it's like, that would play on repeat. And then anytime I would see it, like I would just immediately, my brain flashes to sitting in the cubicle, listening to Disturb, getting coffee, and like those flashes happen when I see my work. Like I'll look back at it and something I don't have like a concrete, like, oh yeah, I was totally doing this thing at that time. I get flashes of experiences, I guess, or feelings. I don't know. It's weird because I'll look at it and yeah, maybe a song, like not the actual song, but just like the kind of the idea of it will flash in my head real quick, and like some surrounding memories, and it's just like a weird moment in time associated with that game or that specific part of that game. Yeah, that's really what comes back to me. There isn't a ton of like when I did the subject, I wasn't watching Alien, but I was looking at tons of Alien reference for the environment. Like I took a bunch of like the Nostromo is like a ton of the hallways and everything in there.
Yeah, that smooth, so, like like a lot of horizontal lining, like,
and a lot of stuff that's like that plastic molding looking stuff and everything. It's like so much so because I love that stuff. I like 80s sci-fi. And so much so that someone accused me of like ripping assets from the Alien game that had come out. I think Isolation.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that is extremely flattering, but no, I made all of this. And I had like all the Twitch like VODs and everything that I shared to be like, see, no, I made all this. I didn't steal it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's definitely like, I think now while I'm working on games, it's really tough for me to have something that I'm watching while working because I switch gears from code to art to level building and all that stuff so often. If I'm doing art, I can have a movie on nonstop and have it on loop. It doesn't distract me too much. But code, I can't have anything that has lyrics. I can't have anything that has dialogue because I'm trying to type code out. So it's like it like messes. I think it exists in the same brain functions or something, or there's an overlap because my brain's just like, what am I trying to say? So then I have to just listen to like was it Master Boot Record or something like that?
Master Boot Record, yeah.
Yeah, where it's just like crunchy computer sex noises and like what I would listen to while I'm developing for the most part.
I always think about the fact that like if when I was in high school and college, if I just had like Master Boot Record or any of the heavy dark synth stuff that's out now, like it would have been so much better for me because I am the same way. As soon as I put on anything with lyrics, it's like that's where my mind starts listening to that. I was like, okay, let me analyze this, and I have to have silence when I read. Like it's just one of those things. Otherwise, I'm reading the same. You ever figure out, oh, I just read this page 5 times and I still don't know what it says? Like,
yeah.
I hate that feeling.
That's what I'm saying. I think there's a portion of your brain that just takes in dialogue and it crunches it the same way it brings in text and crunches that, right? So it's like, because I guess there's some piece there that's the same. Because yeah, I'll constantly, if I have a video on or something and I jump into code real quick, I'll like get one line in and then be like, what am I saying? What am I doing? What is this? No, what am I? And I'll have to close everything and just be in silence and think for a second. Yeah,
I feel too like it's just one of I don't know. I have to have that like when I was studying or anything like that. Just it had to be. I mean, really, the only thing you had was like instrumental rock, which sucks, and like or classical, and you're just kind of like, all right, I guess I'm just gonna sit here in silence. But if even people just having a conversation in the same room, I'm just kind of like I start listening to their problems, and I'm like, I can't deal with this right now. Yeah, get out. I need a silent room. One thing that I've noticed just through playing your games over the years was that the stories are always really good too. Like you have some that aren't quite, you have some that aren't super story intensive, but you have some that are. Obviously, Mortuary Assistant has like a really dark and crazy underlying story to it about the main character. But even something for like even something that's not quite as complex as Mortuary Assistant, like Inner. Right, like you're learning little pieces of information about the character or about what happened here, right? Do you feel like you do all the writing, or I say, do you do all the writing ahead of time, or does that kind of develop as you're developing the game?
It's a little column A, a little column B. I kind of wish I did more up front than I currently do. That's something I'm always trying to grow on, but yeah, usually I'll have like a large idea and I'll kind of figure out the pieces to it of like, I basically come up with basically a story start to end in my head, but it's very like very high level. There aren't like, it's just major beats. It's like an outline, right? And I'll have that idea. And I might write some of it out. I might just start making something. And then as I go, I may hit something where I'm like, well, do I want to, what's happening here that I didn't think about, right? And I'll kind of like have to go back and flesh it out a little more. But for something like Mortuary Assistant, where I've got a lot of character stuff going on, I have these ideas. Like I originally, like Rebecca's story, I had right away. Like I knew that I needed a protagonist with a dark past, so I would have creepy stuff to pull from when I wanted to make spooky things happen around the player, right? So I knew I was going to be going pretty heavy with her story. But then from there, as I started building those things, I realized that, obviously, why is this stuff happening? And that was a secondary thing that I had some justification for earlier, but that sort of took on a different shape over time as I wanted to include Raymond more into it, because originally it was all Rebecca centric. And then I was like, well, there can be more to this. And that became more and more about Raymond and then the things going on in the mortuary, and that sort of unraveled. But each beat, each thing became like I'm going to sit down and think this out and write stuff down. And then I'd get my 3 a.m. thing where I then finally plug in the missing piece. That's like, oh, okay, there's the whole story. That's how I solve that. So it's definitely like, I don't go in blind. Like I know what I want to make and I know the story I want to tell because I like story-driven things. Clearly, because that's what I like to make.
Right.
but I still leave some things sort of unexplored until I sort of reach those points in the game. And some of that's on purpose. And some of that, like I said, I wish I would do a little more at the beginning. But some of it's on purpose because the gameplay might dictate something else. I may have a story idea and then I realize there's this mechanic I want to do or a certain approach I want to take to the game. And then the story doesn't quite unfold properly if I follow that. So I go, okay, well now I need to retell a piece of this story in order to make it work, Yeah.
And I guess too, especially if you're teaching, if you're revealing that in pieces too, is kind of a challenge, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because I've noticed I've just kind of noticed that skill developing as I've played your games, and honestly, it's like there's some moments in Mortuary System where you're just kind of like, holy shit, like jaw drop moments where you're like, oh my god, like that's, and it makes you feel something, right? And like I know part of that, a lot of that is writing, but some of that too is like voice acting and just having the right people
to great voice actors,
dude. It's incredible. Like what? So. I mean, I know you've obviously dealt with voice acting before, having dealt with all the stuff you dealt with in the past, but like, how much direction did you have to give, like, when you were talking to these people to read these lines for you?
Some, I mean, not a whole lot, because I was very, very blessed. Adam Bennett is amazing. It's Melissa, why my brain? Oh no!
No, it's all right.
So bad. So bad.
You got a lot going on, man. You got a lot going on.
I know, but it's not fair.
But while you look it up,
Melissa Medina.
Okay, there you go.
I could stop looking it up right away because I finally my brain got over it.
Right.
Both of them extremely talented. Obviously, the other actors as well. Eileen England, Autumn Ivy. They're all fantastic. I was very, very fortunate to find these people. But I mean, part of it is you're weeding through a bunch of different people to try and find the right sound. And someone, you're listening to their reel, you're trying to make sure they can kind of hit the notes you're looking for emotionally. And then on top of that, the way that I do dialogue, I try to give as much direction in the script as possible. Instead of just giving like, here's a line, here's a line, here's a line, here's a line, I approach dialogue the same way you would write a movie script. So I write the dialogue, and I have the characters, like their names and their dialogue, and in the process of like the piece, and then there's descriptors of like, from what I see happening, I say so and so walks across the room, or this, the door opens, or it's this time of day, or this, like, I'm trying to give as much emotional and environmental information as possible, so that way they have everything that they could hopefully possibly need to work with it. And so from there, they'll do some takes. They might come back with some questions, but it's really been like they'll do a few takes of each line, and there's only been a handful of times that I've kicked stuff back and be like, hey, could you do this take again? Maybe with a little more of this or a little more of that. Now, after that point, I have to pick all the cuts that I like and string them together in Audacity, right? So it's like I'm taking, like I've done some weird things where I've taken half a word and another half of a word and like blended them together to try to get the inflection that I want for something, just because it's easier for me to try that real quick than to go back through the whole process.
Right.
And so I would do stuff like that, and I would take, this take over here, that take over there, and run it all together until it sounded the way I imagined it sounding. And then if I have a conversation going on, I've got to do the same thing for the other, and then play them together and make sure it sounds like they're having a natural conversation. Because it's like, as a solo developer, I don't have money to go to like a studio and have them fly them all out to record together, right? So it's like I gotta take what they do in a vacuum and what another person does in a vacuum and try to make it sound natural together. But it's not just on me; it's the fact that Adam and Melissa had worked together on stuff before, and they are at least familiar with each other's styles and their sounds. So like Adam Bennett was really awesome because he was like, hey, can you send me Melissa's takes so that I can, kind of work off of them and everything. And that was a fantastic way to kind of kick out the middleman and be like, okay, well, we can't record together, but at least you can record reactively. Right.
Yeah.
And that was really important for the ending where they're having some beef over the basement. Right. And like to sound like they're actually arguing. But so much of that is just the fact that they are extremely skilled, and they
very
did
pro,
a fantastic job.
Very pro sounding. Like it was just, I mean, when going through any of the scenes, I'm just kind of like, God damn! Like I'll just be talking to Chad, I'll be like, God damn, this sounds great! Like it's so good. Like they do such a good job, because you would think, especially in a lot of those situations, like you were talking about, that they would be in the same room together. That they would be, talking this back and forth. And I mean, it makes sense obviously to listen to other person's takes, but man, it's just so well done. It came off very, very pro. Very pro.
Cool. Yeah, it's good, because it's a really weird, like, it's a weird mix of like their acting and kind of my acting, because I'm like shoving it together to work, and so it's really a bizarre kind of mix of everything. I mean, it's fun, but it's different. I think it'd probably be easier if they could be in the same room and I could just be like, try arguing again.
Right. Yeah.
In this way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know, just as well as you, like sitting down and being like, all right, let's edit this audio for the next however many days. Like it just sounds like a wah, wah, wah. After a while, you're like, I don't even know if I heard that right. Did I hear that right? Like, I have no idea, because you're just like, you want that inflection and you're like, am I getting it, or am I just imagining I've got it? Like,
yeah. Well, it's like also just like the sheer volume of like the amount of times I'm listening to things where it's just like, it's an emotional scene and I'm just listening to the same 3 words over and over and over again, connecting them, trying to get the pacing right and everything. And at some point, I'm just like, oh my God, this sucks. Yeah. This isn't emotional. There's no feeling here. Not from the actors, but in my writing, right? Or just like, it's again, that like, I've heard it so much where I'm just like, this is dumb.
Yeah. You're talking back to the actors. You're like, oh, are you sad? You're arguing with them. You're like, are you really sad? Because you don't sound like it. That's really funny. Because I mean, obviously audio is huge for me, like just because of radio and stuff like that. And just we talked a little bit about it in offline, like just getting the sounds for any of the process of messing with the body, like I said before, the squelching, the crunching, like all that stuff. It's just anytime there's one person in my chat, every time I do start to put in the anchors for the wiring the mouth shut, they're like, oh God, it's so hollow and crunchy.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really trying to make sure I got like making sound, because I agree, sound is extremely important, especially it's like when you're trying to build an atmosphere that people can get sucked into. Like if the sound sucks, they're going to get pulled out instantly, So it's like there's things where, you bring up the jaw wiring, like the needle injector. That's like 6 different sounds that I was cutting together and blending because I really wanted this like mix between like a stapler and a nail gun and just like this really chunky, like ka-chunk, as you're trying to do things, but also get that smacky, that higher pitched smacky sound of like driving something into like I give my
gold star.
It's just weird just thinking about it. But yeah, it's just like doing that where you're going through a million different like sound effects and some stuff you've recorded yourself and like trying to blend it all together, like that it takes a long time, but I think it's really important. I think it's a huge part of what sells something. So yeah, I totally agree.
I will freely give this idea away to anyone out there that's watching this. Go in and just put cartoon sounds over the top of all of this and just make a cut scene of like boing, like when they're just like stapling the wiring the jaw shut and stuff like that. Just anything.
There's a clip on Twitch from when I was making some of the original haunting events, and I have the cold storage doors slamming, and I didn't have a sound effect, so I just recorded myself saying "slam" real quick, and so I ran it, and it's just this clip of like slam, 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 slam over and over and over again, and like there's so many things where I just do silly sound effects while I'm doing it because that's just the way my brain is working when I'm streaming, where I'm doing something, I'm like making sound effects for stuff. And people keep saying that I need to make a game where I just do all the sound effects myself. And I think that'd be awesome to do. And I keep saying that it would be great to do, and then I don't have time to do it. So I really want to get to doing it once I'm back from PAX. I think it'd be fun just to do something silly like that.
Even just like just some sort of mini game where you got to get a few things done. It would remind me of something like Robot Chicken or something like that. You know. Man, that's incredible. So good. But yeah, the sound thing, I think a lot of people, and it's super important for, like you said, atmosphere, especially in horror, like to hear that little sound and be like, what? And it makes the sounds that make you look to where it's coming from, like, and then the scare is there and you're like, oh, that's fucking brilliant. Like, it's just like, you hear a little above you and you're like, and then you just, all of a sudden there's, the mimic is sitting there just like, staring at you.
What's another like very important part of that is the silence, where it's like making like the game isn't silent. There's no point where I have it be completely silent unless I'm trying to be impactful by just pulling everything away. But there's always some sort of room tone, or like there's the storm rolling in the background all the time. But there's a lot of effort put into trying to make an environment that has noise so you don't feel bored, but it fades in the back enough that you feel like you're just in this quiet environment, so that when you do hear a noise, it does jump out at you, right? So there's this really weird middle ground you try to hit of like enough noise so that people don't feel like they need to put spooky music on their stream for themselves because it's too quiet, and like just having way too much, like I've got ambient music, I've got all sorts of sounds going on, so when things happen you don't realize, right? So it's like you're trying to walk this line of something that pulls you in so that when you do sounds that are meant to be impactful, they're impactful, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think that it's so subtle that like even just a person who's not paying attention for it just would never notice that. Like they're like, oh, it's good. It's like a sleight of hand. Like I always tell people, like That's the one thing I kept saying in my stream when we were playing the demo and a little bit when we were playing the full release. Like I was like, he's so good at sleight of hand. Like you get comfortable. Like you do the thing where there's a small scare and then you're like, okay, that's done. And then it's like a big scare happens after that. And you're like, those are my favorite clips that people post up on Twitter where they're like, oh my God. And they're like, oh my God. Like it just happens again right afterwards.
Yeah. I love this. I think one of my favorite ones is the woman in white in the black doorway. It's like, I've seen so many people, they like round the corner and they see the face and like, oh my God. And she goes away into the dark and I'm like, oh, thank God. Okay. But they're like kind of inching because it's all black in there. And they know that like they have this feeling of like, oh, something's going to grab me. But I don't have many things that do that. Yeah. So that for this reason, for when it does happen, you're like, I love that stuff so much. It's so great to see.
Yeah. There's a cool thing too that I've been noticing just because like if there's a night where I don't feel like starting anything new or something like that, I'm just like, let's just work on some bodies and just talk shit. And, when you kind of go on that autopilot of just like, all right, I'm going to go take the embalming report to the front and we're going to do this. And, you're just running back and forth, getting the task done. Right. And then like you're in the middle of maybe saying something or just like, all right, I'm going to take and then all of a sudden you just get grabbed and drug across the floor for a second and nothing else happens. And it just startles you and pulls you out of that like lull of this is, you can't ever get too comfortable in being like, all right, we're just going to chill out and run these bodies. It's a really cool thing.
That was the aim of everything I was trying to do with the haunt system, right? Was I really wanted to do something where people felt like they weren't safe, they've always got to be looking over their shoulder. Because the thing that I was trying to head for was the feeling that you get when you like go into a dark room or go into a basement or something, you're all by yourself and you get that little feeling on the back of your neck or whatever. Yeah. It's like, I wanted that, like I wanted a video game equivalent of that, or at least try to get that where, they've experienced things just staring at them before. Yeah. So now they're just like, oh my God, there's always something behind me. That's what I really was trying to hit. And it seems like most people experience that. So that's really nice to see too. It's really great to see the things play out the way that I hope they would, right? It's great when all the things line up properly and someone gets all the right, like they do the right things to trigger different parts of the scare that make it unfold in a really good way. I love seeing it. It's so awesome.
It is. And just the fact that everyone, we talked about in the last show, like everyone gets that different, just a slightly different variation. They're not getting a different main story or anything like that, but like they're getting a slightly different variation. So even like if you're watching someone play something you've already done, like you still get that, holy shit, that scared me. Cause I was, that didn't happen to me. So it's really cool to see that and that unsettling nature of it all. So one thing I've noticed with Mortuary Assistant, because I've played pretty much, I think I've played most, if not all your other games, just a little bit, even if I didn't beat them, right? Like I'll let everyone know this. Brian is not I'm going to give you the way to beat my game guy. Like you're going to have to traditionally really work for it. I think you did a good balance in Mortuary Assistant of being like, all right, you can get the objective done, but there are still things that you got to work to find. Whereas I think something like, Our Secret Below, like it was really all right, I really have to pay attention. Like I really have to be looking through things to find out what that's like. Was that something with Mortuary Assistant? Was that like more of all right, I want this to be something that a lot of people enjoy, so I don't want to make it so hard that it turns people off?
Well, I've always wanted things to be more accessible. Some of that is just the programming skill set stuff where it's like, as I got more skilled, I was able to provide more ways to properly teach people things. And I mean, it's a little different for Our Secret Below because it is an escape room. It's meant to be that way a bit, where you're waking up in this weird place and you've got to pick. I was trying to be more like if you actually woke up in a basement and had to go through somebody's stuff, you wouldn't have any clue what's going on, right? And so I was trying to mirror that to some degree while still giving you a way to learn like the basics by like, you're moving the rag to realize you can interact with things, figure out how to pick something up, and like just all the usual things. But Mortuary Assistant, I was every time you make a game, you realize the things that people don't pick up. And so for this, I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to go full in. I'm just going to tell them how to do stuff. There's not going to be any because there's going to be plenty with the haunt system and the story and side things and I've got a lot to cover because they need to know how to embalm a body and they need to know the premise for the game itself, like the banishment stuff. Yeah. So just the nature of how much I need to teach led to a lot more like trying to make it as accessible as possible without feeling like you're in a tutorial for a half hour, and that's a weird balance to try to hit. Which is why I kind of broke it up into the embalming first, which has a lot more tutorial-y stuff with like all the little yellow frames and pointy arrow things and all that sort of stuff. Just because that's a completely foreign thing for people. People don't embalm bodies, and I'm using terminology that is like the actual tools and stuff. People don't know what those things are. So it's like, it's really important to be like, this is exactly what you do, so that knowledge is there and out of the way for when I bring them into the full game where I now need to teach them the game itself. And so that's why like the embalming in the beginning, the tutorial feels very tutorial-y, so that the tutorial that comes after doesn't feel as tutorial-y, right? Because that's why there's like story mixed in with it. You go in, the door's locked, you get the bit of story, and like I kind of break it up with some of the spooky stuff and everything, and some of the stuff you can figure out at your leisure with the tapes and the night shift database, and that's where that like giving as many avenues to learn things as possible came in. Because I gave the step-by-step on the night shift database, so you knew what you needed to do. I gave you all the tapes, so you knew what you needed to do. And then the phone calls tell you what you need to do. So that way there's a million places that the player can go and get information on what to do. And within the night shift database, there's also like how all the tools work and all that sort of stuff. So that way, you're still learning in the way you want to learn. And it feels like you're done with the tutorial too at the same time. So that was a really like tough thing to try to hit. But yeah, it's definitely something that I think I'm going to keep trying to grow on and be as good as possible with moving forward with other titles. Cause I think it's just onboarding is super important. You want people to enjoy your game. So you need to get the how out and done with. And that's something that, I think my previous titles suffer from to a degree, less so for Our Secret Below, less so for Kohei, and it's like, or more so or whatever. And it goes kind of down to the subject where it's much more complicated, and very little information.
Yeah. I noticed the big jump in from the subject to Kohei. Like that was, that subject is very much and I feel like it's honestly, it's brilliant in a way that it's like, you would be that way if you were put in that situation. You wouldn't know what to press. You wouldn't know where to go. And it makes sense. And I think that the thing that's different, and this is what I was talking to my friend who was actually playing the game tonight before we got started. Like the thing that's different is now you're having to also take into account people who could be streaming this, and then all of a sudden they're starting to play it, and they're just kind of like, they get to a puzzle, and they're just kind of like, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck, Well,
the subject wasn't built with any of that in mind, right? The subject was built as I know how to program enough to try and make a game now. Let me make a game. Right. And so that's why the subject is very clearly my first game. If you play it, and you can see the progression in my titles, I think. So it's that doesn't mean the subject is bad. It's definitely not the strongest, obviously, but it's just obviously my first game. But there is something to that. Yeah, you're being dropped in there and you just have to figure it out. Unfortunately, it doesn't work great for playing a game, right?
Broad appeal. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's there has to be a degree of that. If you want to be able to keep making games, you gotta have more people playing it. And so it's got to be more accessible. And that's why I'm shifting with each title where I'm trying to be more user friendly with the beginning learning experience, and things like puzzles, like the really complicated stuff. I'm trying to step away from that and have that be existing solely for side content, like unlocking alternate endings, getting more lore and stuff like that. Like, all the basement is not necessary to beat the game. Someone could play the game and get all the other endings without ever going down into the basement, right? Now that's not a huge puzzle. It's a lock thing, but it's the only time I would do a puzzle. If I were going to do like, you got to collect things and put these things here and rotate them and do weird stuff, like it would be to get into a room that gives you some extra stuff or some extra lore or something special. So that way, if someone misses it and they beat the game, they still beat the game and feel like they did something. But they'll be like, well, what was that door about? What was that thing? Right. And maybe they want to come back. And then the puzzle is no longer like in the subject where it's a gating thing. And you're like, what do I do? This is stupid. I don't want to play anymore. It goes from that to, I really want to solve this to get to this thing, whatever it is. I don't know what's behind this. I don't know what's in this box, but I got to find out, right? And that's the direction I'm going, is trying to make the broader game more user-friendly, and then the more difficult things are rewards,
Yeah, you give them that little corner to pick at. Like after they're bought in, like they're like, oh man, I'm having a great time with this game. Now they're like, well, what is this? Like, how can I open this thing? Like, there was stuff I was finding after multiple runs of a Mortuary system. I was like, no one told me this was here. What is this thing? Like, it's stuff like that. And I don't know. I think I think that when I talk about the subject to people, like, and I'm like, I really love that game. But when people were like, oh, would this be great for me to stream? I was like, I don't know. Like, maybe it wouldn't. Like, honestly, I put it more on a level of something like The Room or Myst, where like you're trying to like figure things out with no help. And so if you're ready for that, sure, like stream it. But I've always looked at the subject, even after streaming it, like as something I can put on in the dark and just go poke around at things. Like go find the switches, go find all that stuff. And that's not necessarily, everybody's bag, but some people just love that. Like, don't tell me anything,
Yeah. And I think there's value there, but the problem is I think that's falling out of fashion a lot, like, cause it's funny you mentioned Myst, because that's the approach that I was taking for the subject, where I was like, I'm going to make something that just, you don't know anything. Yeah. Right. And that sounds great. It sounds fun. When you're the one creating it and everything makes sense, you're like, yeah, this is great. But then someone jumping into the game, not knowing anything, you realize how obtuse some things are, where it's like, you've made something that doesn't seem complex to you because you created the entire thing.
Right.
But some people will sit down and they'll have no clue. And you could make something that you think is the simplest puzzle in the world. Book of Blood. The way to solve the book is insanely simple, but people have a tendency to overthink, and they're going to make it more complex than it already is. So that's something to take into account when you're doing like a puzzle or something, is that it really doesn't need to be that complex, because people are already coming at it not knowing anything. So not knowing anything is a huge tool in something being difficult. So it's I think that's where the subject is just like, kind of ultra hard mode, and where Kohate became sort of the subject light, in that you're mainly collecting stuff and trying to figure certain things out to make your way to the end. There's a lot more lore. It's more focused on like, there's a lot more explanation and everything. There's a lot more onboarding just to try and make that experience more user friendly. And again, that's part of that progression, because it came after our Secret Below, because it was like a little thing before Halloween. So each title has a bit more of that, like, hey, buddy, you want to play a game? Here's how you can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel like, I don't know, like, because I've talked to a lot of people who play a lot of horror games. Like, do you feel like you've done something really different with Mortuary System that hasn't been messed with before? Like the RNG of it, the replayability of it, like, because not a lot of horror games have a good replayability value. Like it sometimes.
That's so tough, because it's like, some people tell me that, and it's like, I know that that's what I have tried to do, I'm not someone who can sit here and be like, oh yeah, I've totally done something unique, right? Like all I know is that I have tried my best to do something that my goal is to try and bring something that could possibly be somewhat fresh to the horror space in
Yeah.
indie horror space, right?
Right.
And so that's why I wanted to do something that had a lot of replayability, but also I really focused on how the haunting events happen, the reactionary stuff, the things that I do with screen detection, and like the things to like read what the player is doing and check against the circumstances that different events require and see if they're met, and like fire them in a way that will feel natural and feel like you're discovering these things. um that stuff I do think is different. But it's really tough for me as an individual to even if I thought it for a second, it's tough for me to admit that it's
Yeah.
something unique, you know. But I I do think it has done something. It resonates with people in some way, and I just know what I set out to do, and I think it's up to other people to decide if that's what I've accomplished. You know?
Yeah, and I'll let you know when I was writing this question down, I was like, how do I put this in a way where I'm not like, what is it like to reimagine a whole genre of horror? You just redefined everything. Because I mean, I think there's a little subtlety to it. Like there's a subtle like thing that's just kind of like, oh, so it's got that like odd, like as soon as you wrap up a shift, you're like, all right, let's go do another one. Like it's like that perfect. There's like the time to it. Like there's a time in which you can get through a shift. You can make it as long. I mean, you can make it as long as you want to an extent. Otherwise, you just die, right? So it's like, you just kind of have to, take it for what it is. But like, it's just cool because I've never really seen a situation where I'm like, okay, let's just. I just finished Layers of Fear. Let's start a new game. Like it's like you just don't do that, right? It's like this hours and hours.
The let it ride concept. I really the whole focusing on different shift stuff actually came a little bit later, because I was trying to do all this story stuff and everything, and then I decided to do the story fragments, where it's like you get a different one each time, because I was trying to really lean into the concept that I had already taken with the haunt system, where you get different hauntings each time. So even the story, I was like, well, you can sort of collect it, and as you replay it, you'll get more pieces and learn a little bit more. And that was once I decided to do that, I was like, well, I should really start focusing then on, like, my whole goal is to have people to come back to the mortuary and work another shift. Let's focus on that and show, like, okay, instead of new game, we're calling it a new shift. And we're going to start, I decided to start recording different stats from all the things that you've done, and like start to visualize the different endings that you can get. And just those little things started to help really, I think, solidify with people that you're meant to play this more. And that's what I was trying to do, was to communicate that my intention is for you to keep replaying this.
Yeah.
And that was, like I said, that was something that came a little bit later in development. But it was, I think it ended up being the right call, because I was taking a risk already with a short play time.
Yeah.
And so when you do something like that, like obviously the session is short, but the overall like content worth of gameplay is quite a bit. It's anywhere from 10 to 12 hours, right? Somewhere in there. So you really need to communicate with people that that's how it's meant to be played.
Yeah, that's a weird line to tread, right? Because I feel like a lot of people, especially right now, people who play games mainly on Steam or something like that, where they're kind of like, all right, so how many hours of content, like how long is it going to take? I had that question, like, how long is it going to take me to beat this? And I'm like, well, it depends on what you define beating. Like, you're talking about finishing getting through a shift and getting, part of the story, or are you talking about getting all the endings? You're talking about getting all the secrets? Like, it depends, because to me, the value in the game is the ability to go back and play again and still not have to go through the same, because we've all got those games that we'll play multiple times through, and we know, all right, this guy comes out here, blah, 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 and you brought that, like, that aspect of, maybe he won't, maybe he will, maybe someone new is going to show up, it's
I think you can start to, like, after a lot of playthroughs, I think you can start to pick up on, like, something like you get a feeling of like something might happen soon and kind of like what things might be kind of tied to. But because of a lot of the other factors, yeah, I mean, there's a reason that I still get caught off guard even while developing it. It's like I'll be testing something and forget that the haunt system's on, and I'll end up catching myself off guard because I had no idea that something was going to happen. So it's like it's still that's the hope was to go beyond the story and go beyond like the things that are the end of the game, right? The hope was that you would want to come back and just work a night in the mortuary. That's really what I want to try to hit. And that's, new modes that are going to be coming out where I do like a non-story mode where you just do you just get the hauntings. So it's more like a day in the life for Rebecca after she's sort of come to terms with everything and experienced everything the demons have to offer. You can kind of go into that mode. Just things that like let you kind of experience this environment in the way that you want and want to come back to the mortuary, in terms of like also the embalming only mode that I want to do, like just things where you can kind of play around in the universe a little bit.
Yeah, almost like a chill mode kind of thing where it's just kind of all right, cool, we can do this. Well, let's take a quick break. I got to use the bathroom terribly. And we'll do a couple more questions from the living, and then we'll get out of here after that.
All right. Sounds awesome. Good.
Right, give me just a second. All right, let's get some of these questions from the living, for the living, for and from. Yeah, for and from, to and fro, right? From the living. I reached out to my community as well as people on Twitter to see what they had to ask Brian about. And the first one comes from a buddy of mine in my Twitch community. Rocket Robo Bear asks, how do you handle criticism, or do you handle it at all? Do you just look past it?
A little bit. So there's always going to be people that dislike things. And you have to kind of ignore some of that. Really, some criticism has great constructive feedback that you can use right away, and you're like, that's a really good idea. But a lot of it, when you're talking about a game that's out in the wild, you kind of need to wait and see if there's a bulk of that same feedback. So if someone is like, this game sucks because X, I mean, even if they use harsh language, I usually try to take what they're saying and note it. And then if more people have that same feedback, and then more people have that same feedback, it's like, okay, there's a problem that needs to be addressed, right? But I mean, one person that's saying your game sucks and it needs to change because of this, it's really easy, especially as like a smaller developer, to see that stuff and be like, oh my God, I need to change this so that they're happy. I need everybody to be happy, right? And it could just be one person that had a bad experience. And even if it's tough, because even if they're having the worst experience and their game is crashing and they're having all this stuff, I mean, yeah, you need to look into why those crashes are happening. But if those crashes are not happening for 99% of people, there's only so much you can do and only so much that you can focus on, right? So you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt and like put it in the back of your mind of like, okay, let me make a note of this issue. So if it comes up again, I can maybe get repro steps from that person too, and try to fix this problem, because problems obviously need to be fixed. But some people just be mean and that you just have to ignore. There are other people that, they're angry in their feedback because they're passionate about the game. I've seen that a lot too. And my approach for most of it is just kill them with kindness, where I get a lot of messages where they're like, man, I couldn't handle something like that. I would be so upset like right away and everything. And it's like, well, you just gotta, it's a public service industry at that point where you're like, I'm really sorry you're experiencing that. Can you give me your machine information? Can you give me this? Can you give me that? These are the plans that I have for the future, which would address these things. I can't do it right now because X, it's like, you really just try to be as personable as possible and respectful as possible, because at the end of the day, these people are upset, because they spent their hard-earned money on something and they're feeling they're not getting their value out of it. And as much as it may hurt to get feedback that's really harsh, that's still something very valid that I think you need to take to heart, is that while they're not always great at realizing there's a person on the other end of the game.
Sure.
It's important to realize that there is a person that has spent their money to buy your game. And you then have a responsibility to make sure that it's a good experience for as many people as possible. And you're not going to be able to please everybody. People are going to be pissed. Like that happens, right? But any criticism, again, you got to look at it in bulk to see if you're getting legitimate criticism, or if you are, you just need to handle it in a professional way, because that's the only way that it's going to turn around. Because some of those people that, again, I said they can be upset because they're passionate. If you can please them in some way, they can turn around to become some of your most hardcore advocates. Yeah. So you never know. And that's why it's important to be nice to all of them.
That kind of echoes something that when I had Games with Death on a couple of weeks ago, it kind of echoes what he was talking about when people come in and they're like, this sucks because of this. So, what you're doing sucks because of this. Like, he tries to at least take note of it and see if it has weight. Like you were talking about, does it have weight? Does it have legs? All right. Do they have a valid point? And sometimes it is. And sometimes it's just not, it's just shittily put. So for lack of a better way. Yeah, it's just shittily put, but it's valid, right? And that's really interesting because I think that most creative ventures have that. Movies, music, like, your guitar sucked on or something like that. Anything along those lines. And I don't know. I think it's just, that's kind of the thing with the internet, right? Like some people many people just don't know how they're coming across. Now, what I was wondering based off that, I was like, what is if you have one, if you don't, no big deal. What is the weirdest like complaint or like or criticism or just someone took notice of something and made note to you on Mortuary Assistant?
That the bodies aren't naked. There's a thread that's entirely too long for what it is on Steam.
This came up the other night.
they want the old lady naked. They want everybody naked, and it's like there's a line where it's like I'm trying to make a game to sell to as many people as possible, and it's like nudity is one of those things where it's like, especially in the US, super uptight. So it's like it's better to play the err on the side of like modesty for that, but it's also not too far from how it's actually done, because embalmers will cover up the bodies to just be respectful, basically. Whether it's like a little like paper thing they put over them, or whether it's underwear and a paper thing or whatever, it's like they'll do that. So, they're not just naked the whole time like an autopsy. They'll like put a blanket on them when they're doing makeup and stuff like that, So it's not out of the realm of possibility that they would have underwear on. So it's just mildly concerning the number of people that want these dead people naked. Well, the
internet just has their thing of doing what they're gonna do. So that makes sense. That makes sense.
But that's probably the most bizarre.
There's if it gets big enough, there's just gonna be an entire just fanfic of all of it.
God. That's how you made it. When there's porn of it, you made it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to combine two. I'm going to kind of Frankenstein two questions together because they kind of get at the same thing. Yellow Gem Ecto on Twitter, as well as get this, Dylan the Dilf, want to know about the research process for Mortuary Assistant. Do you have acquaintances working in mortuaries, or did you just talk to people, or did you just kind of start and get gather critiques from the community as you were going?
Well, first, congratulations, Dylan. It sounds like you're a good-looking Jen.
Dilf with a Y, by the way. It's not the it's not the dad I'd like to fuck. It's the dad you'd like to fuck. All right.
Okay. Well, that's even more confidence. So that's great. So I don't know any embalmers. I don't know anybody personally. I haven't been to a mortuary. I would love to. I actually did research on trying to get a tour, but it was at the height of COVID, and there was no way I was going to get into those places. It's already hard to do, and there was no way they're going to let anybody in. So what I had to do was I watched lots of like student videos, just your regular documentaries. I watched all sorts of like the Ask a Mortician stuff. I watched all of those. There's some great content out there. And then I've also read a lot of magazines around that stuff, about a lot of articles about the different tools, a lot of like instructional documentation. I went to sites where you actually order all the tools that you would need and the chemicals. And I read all the descriptions and the contents of those things and stuff. And just like basically did as much research as I could to be as accurate as possible. And that's for all eras of embalming, basically, in like modern embalming. That's why there's like a mix of tech in Mortuary Assistant, where it's like I do I do gravity embalming for like the cavity filling, which I think is still done to some degree, but like the trocar is like an older trocar, and basically anything that would either serve the design well or be creepy looking. That's what I went with. So it's kind of a mix of all those things. And so I did research of not just the newest stuff, but also the older creepy stuff.
Yeah, what's going to look better, like the nice new technology, or like the weird, like you're going to find these tools in the basement of House of a Thousand Corpses kind of tools, right?
Exactly.
So that's really cool. And it's funny you bring up Ask a Mortician, because that was Yellow Jim's follow-up was, have you ever watched Ask a Mortician channel on YouTube?
Yep. So yeah, I've watched a number of different channels that have some great content. All weird mortician stuff. It's really kind of like become desensitized to a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, you're going to get approached at PAX or at one of these future conventions. You're like, I'm a mortician, and I just got to say, I love what you've done.
I actually, so last PAX, I got a lot of that. There were, I mean, by a lot, I mean, there was like 2 or 3, which is, I think, a lot for random morticians. But there are people that was like, one of them was a former police officer who was a coroner and saw a lot of the same sort of stuff, and another one who was actually an embalmer, and they were at first it was funny because this one woman who was an embalmer was standing there with her friends and watching someone else play, and I'm there dressed just normally. I don't have like a shirt that's like developer on it or anything. So I was like, I heard one of their friends mention to them what they thought of it, and that, I picked up that they were embalmers. So I didn't say anything. I just stood there like listening, because I wanted to know if things were accurate. And at first they were kind of crapping on it. But it was before the person really got into any of it. They were in the tutorial section, and so they were kind of just talking about like the room in general. And then once they actually got into the things, they were like, oh, that's actually accurate. That's accurate. This is all actually really accurate. And it's like, oh, good. Okay, cool. And that's when I started talking to them. I was like, wanted to make sure they were cool at first. But
I heard you talking about how accurate I was. My name's Brian. I made the
now
game.
That you don't hate it, how you do it? But so it's happened a couple times in person already. A lot on Twitter. I've had a number of DMs from people that have offered their knowledge up and everything, which I'm extremely thankful for. Being able to just ping someone and be like, hey, would you normally do this? Like, I didn't do that very often, but there was 1 or 2 times where I contacted people. It was like, is this something that would be at least plausible so that I could use it in my design for things, right? Like the paperwork for the family filing up front. You don't normally do that, but some do. Some do record that stuff and file it away for like the hospital's use or something. So it's like, it's all things that are at the very least derivative of something real, I try to be as realistic as possible with all of it. So yeah, a lot of research into all of that.
Was there and this is a question from the brown guy type thing, but was there a movie or any kind of media that kind of inspired you to do this, or was it more of a can I do this type of idea for like even the original prototype?
So the original prototype was just back against the wall trying to think of something spooky, because I gave myself, like, I think it was a week for a game jam, like just a self-induced game jam. And So I was trying to think, I don't have a lot of time. I got to make a small room. It's got to be a small condensed thing. What would be creepy in that scenario? Well, dead bodies are creepy. All right.
Yeah.
Why would you need to be in a room with a dead body? And so that became autopsy or embalming. I was like, well, autopsy is too like sterile. It's very like, it's much more scientific. Everything it's different sets of tools and stuff. But embalming is more of like an art. And you're much more like climbing all over the body doing stuff. It's like, yeah, autopsies can get pretty gnarly, but I felt there was something different about the embalming process. It felt much more personal. And I think part of that was sort of justified when I got to know things in the embalming community more about, being very death positive and stuff like that, where it's like, there's a real love for doing this stuff and this belief that like, you're really giving the family one last look at the person they love in the way they remember. Right. And so all of that sort of comes from this, like you're much more intimate in this space. And so that's how that stuff kind of came about, is like, it's a small area. It makes sense to be close to this body and working around this body. And that's how that happened. And then I thought, obviously, nighttime storm is nice and creepy.
Sure.
And then I got all the likenings to Autopsy of Jane Doe, which I hadn't seen yet. But once the prototype came out, I saw it a lot. And then I put the demo out, and finally I was like, okay, I should watch this thing. It's like people keep mentioning it, and then I watched it. I was like, oh yeah, I can totally see all the similarities here. It's an old building, it's stormy, and there's dead bodies and stuff, and they're getting up and doing things. I could totally get that. Yeah.
There's got to be a balance too, where you don't want to be too informed by something else, right? Where you're like, I don't want that to be in my head, so that all of a sudden I subconsciously put that into my game. Where
I think that's I think that's one reason why I tend to pull from movies for inspiration more. Because I fear that if I play a million horror games, there's stuff that you can get where you can be like, oh, I really like how they do that. I'd like to take that aspect, or I'd like to take this aspect. And that's totally fine. But I don't want to fall into a trap of just being like, I'm going to make this game combined with this game and this and that, right? Like, I think there's a middle ground where you can take all those things and then take your larger concept that's inspired by something else and marry them all together. But I think movies is definitely like where I stick to more.
I have to say, before we hit our last two questions, so we took a little break there for a second, and we've got one of those, like, we've done our basement to where my studio's down here and my wife's office is attached on the other side of the wall, but there's a shared bathroom. And right now she's not down here, so I've got it the door's kind of kicked open a little bit, and there's a towel rack in the bathroom that I keep looking up at, because there's a white towel that's kind of like folded up and like peeking around the corner of the door, and like it does like, I'm like, the mimic is like looking at me. Our next question comes from Chris 99783, who asked us about the inspiration for the mimic earlier. He wants to know if there's going to be more entities added, and will there be a part 2? I think you kind of answered this in offline. You want to do some expansion on it.
Yeah. So I don't know if I want to add new entities, mainly because they're tied to the houses of hell as well, and there are only 3. So unless I want to expand further on the demonology and add more, it's like, I don't know if I want to go that route. But I do plan to do expansion stuff for the game itself, where like we were talking about before, I want to keep supporting my game. So I'm going to have adding new bodies, new haunting events, some extra lore stuff, things for people to find, things for Halloween. I want to get another ending in, and like just things to provide more content and just more story and just things to explore. I do have ideas for a sequel, if that is indeed what you mean by a second. I'm assuming, though it's not very fleshed out right now. It's kind of like I was talking about earlier, where once I have an idea, I kind of jot it down and go, that's the idea that I have. And then I try not to think about it while I focus on the task at hand.
Right.
So there isn't too much I can do there yet. But I think not just an idea for the second, but where the entire thing could go in even a broader sense. So, I don't know how much I'm going to focus on like specifically DLC for Mortuary Assistant. I think I will probably do some, but I think I'm more of a like, part 2 kind of guy. So
Sure.
we'll see how that unfolds. But yeah, there's stuff there, and there's other things I'd like to do with it too. But yeah, so there's plans.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Last question comes from Randy Kincaid on Twitter. He represents the poor, lowly, neglected people of the console. Xbox and PlayStation, are they going to get Mortuary Assistant at any point?
That is the plan. Yes. I'm talking to my publisher. I actually just sent the project to the porting team to start looking into it.
Nice.
Don't know which consoles when, but we are looking at all consoles. So, it's I can't make any promises about any specific one, but it's there and it's being worked on. It's something I want to do. It's something Dread wants to do. And we are actively right now working towards it. So
it's fantastic.
You're going to get some love.
That's fantastic. I'm glad to hear that. Guys, thank you again for all of your questions from the living. Appreciate it. And look, I thought of this while I was taking questions from people. I was like, if you're ever starved to put something on your YouTube or like something on Patreon, just take it. Questions from the living. Just take a question and take 5 minutes and answer it and screw it. There you go. There's your post.
Nice. Take it. Mine.
Yours. It belongs to Brian. It was via me. Just remember that, everyone.
Tweaking it a little.
Yeah, just tweak it a little bit. Well, lastly, I usually go over this with people before I let them go. Like, what are you watching? What are you taking in right now? It could be books, it could be music, it could be movies, TV shows, whatever.
A few different things.
Sure.
Just finished watching the most recent season of The Boys, and also finished Stranger Things. Been watching a couple like serial killer documentaries. That's a thing that comes on every now and then. Nice weird stuff, which I oddly enjoy.
A little light viewing, sure.
Yeah. And I'm halfway through. I'm reading Heir to the Empire, so a Star Wars book. That the Timothy Zahn stuff, or Zane, however you pronounce it.
Sure.
They've been out for a very long time. I have not read them yet, so I'm finally getting around to it. Fantastically written, so I'm pleased with them. But yeah, that's all the stuff I'm like doing on the actual entertainment side. Cool. That, and I played a little bit of Breath of the Wild finally. Okay. Trying to play some video games.
Nice. Trying to treat yourself a little bit.
In like 2 years.
Yeah. One thing I started this past week, I started like the first half of the first episode, but it kind of falls into your wheelhouse. Woodstock 99, that documentary that came out on Netflix.
Yeah, isn't that about how horribly that whole
went? Terrible it went? Yes, it's. I feel like there's a game idea there. Like you're a band and you got to get out, right? But no, it's
awful horror related to all that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's some terrifying things just in the little like blurb they give you at the beginning. It's like, I don't know how the fuck this thing even happened, like kind of stuff, So I started that. We started the new season of whatever the Game of Thrones stuff is, House of Dragons.
Interesting.
And it's
how is that?
It's right in lane with everything else. Like it's not bad so far. They're doing a good job. It's very brutal. I think that you could probably gather some cool ideas from some of the stuff they're doing, because there's some imagery that I was like.
Some HBO-ness.
Yeah.
I jump from service to service instead of having them all, because
sure.
It's a lot.
It's smart. No, it's getting to the point where you might as well have cable again.
I know, right? It's pretty ridiculous with everything. But I was uncertain just because of how Game of Thrones ended.
Yeah.
Where I was like, okay, once they were left up to their own devices, it didn't go super well.
Yeah.
And this is basically all that. So
sure.
I don't know how that's gonna be, but I know it's different writers. And
the thing I do like about it is the actual lore, the base lore that they're writing from exists. So like there's only so many places they could go. And it's good and bad, because I've read a lot of that lore. Earlier I was like, sometimes I'm like, screw lore, but then Game of Thrones, I'm just kind of like, tell me about this random house and what the fuck happened to them. But yeah, there's actually already lore in place, so they can't really fuck it up too bad, I'm hoping. But people have done crazier things.
I haven't seen it, but I'm assuming like it's probably better than Rings of Power because they're not actually allowed to use Tolkien's like Silmarillion like lore. They're allowed to like they're kind of able to do their own thing within the universe. That's like what they have the rights to. So they're kind of so it's not high hopes. But
no!
Who knows? It could be good still.
Well, let me tell you something. Amazon's marketing. They're marketing like crazy because a van pulled up in front of my house the other day that had the giant, all the stuff like promoting that whole
in front of everybody's house.
It's just
Please watch our show.
They were delivering like the hair product I use or something like that, and there's like please watch this show so we can have money. So
I'm gonna give it a shot.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm a nerd. I gotta check it out for sure.
Yeah.
The other thing, and I don't know. I know you said you're an '80s sci-fi horror guy. Have you watched Prey on Hulu yet?
No, I just got Hulu back, and I heard that Prey is very good. I heard the dialogue is terrible, but that doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah.
Because it's a Predator movie, but I've heard that I have heard it is supposedly the best addition to the Predator franchise since the original ones, because all the other ones have kind of been pretty bad. So I don't know if that's a really high bar, but still.
What I like is it's in and out. It's 92 minutes. Like you're not parting with like 3 hours of your time like you do with most movies now. But
that already sets the stage for being appropriate for a Predator movie. So that's good.
Yeah, growing up on those 80s and 90s, sci-fi and action films that were like 68 minutes long. We're just kind of like we're just going to make it just enough to where we shouldn't. It didn't need to be a TV show kind of thing.
Yeah.
It falls in there perfectly. And I mean, come on, like if you want to see some terrible dialogue, like just go watch anything from the 80s, 90s. It's not great. Yeah, like it's not awesome. It's just all catchphrases.
Yeah, exactly.
But I would absolutely check that out. It's a lot of fun.
I'm definitely going to. For sure.
It really is. But dude, I thank you for being on. I know I've kept you for a while, but man, it's been a really fun conversation.
I got nothing going on. It's been great hanging out. Yeah, this is awesome.
Absolutely. If you want to follow him on Twitter, it's at dsdigitaldev. And then he'll be streaming at some point again once the dust settles, like he said. Darkstone Digital on Twitch, and then all the links to all the other stuff. Your itch.io, I think, is still current, right? So
yes.
I'll have that up on the site as well as on the YouTube channel. Brian, thanks for being here, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Also, if anybody happens to be at PAX West, you can come by and say hello.
Yeah, all you morticians. I'll give
you a hearty handshake.
I'm just glad they're not making you dress up in like a crazy Dr. Wily like scientist coat. Like,
I mean, you don't know that.
Yeah, put the goggles the goggles on your head and be like, "Welcome. This is how we embalm bodies." It could be fun, but I'm really got fingers crossed, and I'm hoping for pictures if someone like does some mimic cosplay or something like that.
Well, I'm gonna be taking a ton of. I was not as on it last PAX, and I wish I was, so I'm gonna be taking a lot more pictures and stuff this time for sure.
Is PAX the only thing you have scheduled right now, or are you going to anything else?
Yeah, right now, that's all I got.
Awesome. Well, hopefully I can pair up with you and we can meet up again. That'd be a lot of fun. That'd be a good time.
Yeah, for sure.
But guys, thanks for being here. If you want to check me out, it's at Lopez Radio on Twitter. If you want to check me out on Twitch, it is Lopez Radio. So check me out there. And otherwise, rate, review, subscribe if you want to. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks again, Brian. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.